So today we're going to talk about the difference between zero carb and low carb when you're doing keto, okay? Because they're not the same. There are certain foods that have zero carbs, and there are certain foods that are low carb that have very small amounts of carbs. Now realize it's the carb that determines whether you're going to get into ketosis or not. The higher the carb, the less the ketosis. The lesser the carb, the deeper the ketosis. And ketosis is fat burning. So here are the foods that have zero carbohydrates. All meats, lamb, chicken, pork, etc. All fish. All seafood. Sardines, which is a type of fish. Butter. Coconut oil. Olive oil. Whole cream or heavy cream. Coffee. MCT oil. There are other foods that I didn't mention, but I just want to give you the ones that are most commonly consumed. And by the way, there's something called the insulin index. I talk about this, and I have the scale in my book, okay? But the insulin index is a scale of foods that are non-carbohydrate in nature. And those are the foods, like fat and protein, that have the capacity to influence insulin. And the glycemic index is a scale of carbohydrates that affect blood sugars. Okay, so high in the scale would be foods that will turn into sugar really quick and raise the blood sugar. Low in the scale are carbohydrates that have the least effect on blood sugars. Okay, like celery, for example, that would be very low. High would be jelly beans. Okay, so now let's talk about low carbohydrates. So even though eggs are extremely low, there is a small amount of carbohydrate in eggs, like just slightly more than 0.5 gram per egg. But it has just a tiny amount of carb, so we'll keep it in the low carb range. Now, vegetables are very low on the glycemic index. We're not going to even count them in the equation of figuring out your carbs. We're going to actually ignore these because we want you to consume large amounts of vegetables. But just realize that a fiber is a carbohydrate. But fiber has no influence on insulin. But there are other carbohydrates in vegetables that may influence blood sugars to a certain degree. But typically it's going to be very low. And by the way, when you look at the nutritional facts, on the back of the label, you'll have carbohydrates, total carbs, okay? Then you'll have fiber, then you'll have sugar, okay? So you want to always deduct your fiber from the total carbs to get your what's called net carbs. So that's what you're working off of. And also you would deduct your sugar alcohols, okay? That's like alternative sweeteners. Okay, so now we have half and half, like something you'd put in your coffee. 1 tablespoon is just a little bit more than 1 gram. So it's low, but there's still a small amount. Hummus, 1 tablespoon gives you 2 grams. It's low, but there's still some in there. Berries, 1 cup is 21 grams of carbs and 15 grams of sugar. So out of everything, this would be the highest. But because of the fiber in berries, it's low on the glycemic index. So it's considered low carb. Lemon juice, which we don't really talk about very much, but there is a small amount of carbs, 5 grams of carbs in 1 whole lemon. Okay, nuts, 1 cup equals 28 grams of carbohydrates and 6 grams of sugar. Now that compares with berries, maybe a little bit more, so it's still low carb because we're going to deduct the fiber. The fiber could range anywhere, but depending what nut you're consuming, could range between 9 and 10 or up to 12 grams. So that brings the carbohydrates down. And usually people are not consuming an entire cup of nuts. Maybe they're doing 1/4 of a cup. So this is considered lower carbohydrate. Certain nuts also have higher amounts of sugar. For example, cashews have the most sugar content. So those are the ones that you probably want to avoid. Walnuts are probably the best, and they also have omega-3 fatty acids. Then we get to seeds. 1 cup of seeds is 14 grams of carbohydrate. So considerably lower than the nuts, but look at the sugar. It's 1.8 grams of sugar for an entire cup. So it's much better than nuts. So sunflower seeds are great. Pumpkin seeds are really good. Okay, sour cream. 1 tablespoon is like 0.3 grams of carbs. Very small amounts, but there's still some in there. Whey protein powder, 1 cup gives you 13 grams. So there is carbohydrate in whey protein powder, okay? Then we have olives. 1 cup gives you 8 grams of carbs. But of course, olive oil is 0. Avocado, 1 cup 12 grams of carbs. Realize there's a good amount of fiber in there too. And then 1 gram of sugar. So this is pretty good to do on keto. The more that you lower your carbohydrate, the more you go into ketosis. So let's say you're struggling. Well, then look at some of these items here and maybe you reduce berries and nuts, okay? Or you substitute seeds for nuts. There's always things that you can do to keep bringing your carbs down lower and lower. But also realize that some of these proteins here have an effect on insulin, and you don't want to do a high protein diet. You want to do a moderate protein diet. More of that data is in this book right here. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Hey, if you're liking this content, please subscribe now, and I will actually keep you updated on future videos.